If you had told me that my straight roommate would confess to me twice in a single day, I would have laughed and called you crazy. But that's exactly what happened. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. It only takes a second, it's completely free, and your support helps us create more heartfelt and unforgettable stories. We'd also love to know where you're watching from today, so leave your city or country in the comments below and say hello. We truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to our story. The hardest person to fall in love with is the one who smiles at you every morning like you're already home. I used to think people exaggerated when they said love could sneak up on you. I thought it arrived with fireworks, dramatic speeches, or impossible coincidences. Mine showed up in dirty coffee mugs left in the sink, grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator with a faded magnet, and the familiar sound of my roommate humming off-key every Tuesday while making pancakes. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 24 years old, and I've spent the last 18 months sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle with Liam Carter, the straightest man I'd ever met. At least that's what he reminded everyone. I'm straight. He'd casually mention whenever one of our friends teased him about being too comfortable around me. Very straight. He always laughed afterward, and everyone else laughed too. I usually forced myself to join in because it was easier than admitting the joke landed somewhere deep inside my chest every single time. Loving your roommate wasn't part of anyone's financial plan when rent was split 50-50. It definitely wasn't part of mine. I had become an expert at pretending. Pretending I didn't notice the way Liam always saved the last slice of pizza because he knew it was my favorite. Pretending I didn't replay every conversation before falling asleep. Pretending my heart behaved normally whenever he flashed that effortless grin. That somehow made bad days feel smaller. Maybe that was why our apartment had become dangerous. It looked ordinary enough. White walls, secondhand couch, tiny kitchen with cabinets that refused to close all the way. But every corner carried memories I never asked for. The window where we watched thunderstorms with takeout containers balanced on our knees. The hallway where he once caught me after I slipped on a wet floor and laughed until both of us could barely breathe. The living room where we spent an entire Sunday assembling furniture that still leaned slightly to the left because neither of us had bothered reading the instructions. Those little moments piled up quietly until they became something impossible to ignore. Not for me, anyway. That Monday morning began like hundreds before it. My alarm buzzed at 7. I shuffled into the kitchen wearing an old college sweatshirt, expecting silence. Instead, Liam stood by the coffee maker, sunlight spilling through the blinds across his messy brown hair. He looked over his shoulder and smiled like he always did. "Morning, sleepyhead." "Morning," I answered, hoping my voice sounded more awake than my feelings. He slid my favorite mug across the counter before I even asked. "Extra cream. No sugar." I remembered. You always remember. The words escaped before I could stop them. For just a second, something changed in his expression. The playful confidence faded into something quieter, almost uncertain. He stared at me with an intensity that made the room feel strangely still. Even the coffee maker seemed louder than usual. My pulse picked up for reasons I refused to examine. Liam took one slow breath, rubbed the back of his neck, and looked directly into my eyes. "Ethan," he said softly, "I think I'm in love with you." Tom did not stop. That was the strange part. The coffee maker continued dripping into the glass pot with slow, patient clicks. A city bus groaned somewhere below our apartment window. A neighbor's dog barked twice in the hallway before everything settled back into its ordinary rhythm, as if the universe had completely ignored the fact that mine had just tilted sideways. I stared at Liam, convinced. My brain had rearranged a perfectly normal sentence into something impossible. He looked just as surprised as I felt. His blue eyes widened for the briefest moment before he blinked several times, almost like he was waking from a dream. Then, without warning, he let out a short laugh and rubbed both hands across his face. "Wow," he muttered. That came out wrong. My heart, which had climbed somewhere into my throat, stumbled back down with painful confusion. "What?" I finally managed to ask. Liam shook his head quickly and reached for his coffee mug as though it had become the most fascinating object in the apartment. "I barely slept last night," he said with an awkward chuckle. "I mean, I love living with you. You know, As a roommate. You are my best friend. My brain just skipped a few words. He laughed again, but this one sounded thinner, almost rehearsed. I searched his face for the joke. Everyone else seemed to understand except me. Right? I answered, forcing a smile that felt stiff around the edges. That makes a lot more sense. Exactly. He pointed at me with exaggerated relief. See? Coffee before conversations. That is my new rule. I nodded because there was nothing else to do. My body went through the familiar motions of the morning on pure instinct. I poured coffee into my mug. I grabbed a granola bar from the cabinet. I picked up my messenger bag from beside the couch. Somewhere inside me, however, another version of the morning kept replaying the words exactly as he had said them. I think I am in love with you. No missing words. No sleepy mistake. Just 7 simple words refusing to disappear. Liam followed me to the front door while pulling on his jacket. You are working from the office today, right? He asked. Yeah. Monday meetings. Good luck surviving them. He bumped my shoulder with his. The same playful gesture he had done 100 times before, yet today it felt different. Smaller somehow. More careful. I looked up, expecting his usual easy grin. Instead, I caught him studying my face with an expression I had never seen before. It lasted less than a second before he smiled normally again. Have a good day, Ethan. You too. The elevator ride down felt unusually long. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the crisp Seattle air should have cleared my thoughts, but it only made them louder. Every memory from the past year suddenly demanded a second look. The nights he insisted on waiting up until I got home. The way he remembered tiny details I had forgotten telling him. The countless times friends joked that we acted like an old married couple while Liam laughed just a little too hard. Maybe I had imagined all of it. Maybe I was simply letting one strange sentence rewrite an entire friendship. I reached the corner just as the walk signal flashed white. Halfway across the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down expecting a work email. Instead, it was a text from Liam. It read, "Drive safe today." And, "About this morning, forget I said anything." I stopped walking before the next message appeared almost immediately. Seriously, forget it. The rest of the morning refused to cooperate with me. Numbers on spreadsheets blurred together until they looked like tiny gray ants marching across my monitor. During the weekly team meeting, I nodded at all the appropriate moments, even laughed once when everyone else did. But if anyone had asked me what the discussion was about, I could not have answered. My thoughts kept wandering back to one quiet kitchen, one warm cup of coffee, and 7 impossible words that Liam insisted I should forget. Forgetting turned out to be remarkably difficult when my phone sat 3 feet away, tempting me every few minutes. I read his messages again during lunch. "Drive safe today." And, "About this morning, forget I said anything." Seriously, forget it. The second message bothered me more than the first. People did not usually send 2 separate texts to erase something meaningless. If he had simply mixed up his words, why was he still thinking about it an hour later? Why was I? I sighed and locked my phone before I could read them for the 10th time. My coworker Maya dropped into the chair across from me with a salad and an amused smile. "You look like someone just told you your favorite television show got canceled. Is it that obvious?" I asked. "You have been staring at the same sandwich for 5 minutes." I looked down. She was right. I had not taken a single bite. "Long morning," I said carefully. "Roommate drama," she guessed. I nearly choked on absolutely nothing. "How did you know?" Maya shrugged. "Because whenever people your age look that distracted, it is either work, family, or whoever shares the rent." I laughed weakly. "Nothing serious." "Good. I like hearing boring answers." She stood and tossed her empty container into the recycling bin. "Life is complicated enough already." After she walked away, I found myself smiling despite everything. If only she knew how spectacularly unhelpful the boring answer actually was. The afternoon crawled by one email at a time. Around 4 o'clock, I received another text from Liam. This one was almost painfully ordinary. "Do you want tacos or pasta for dinner?" I stared at the screen, wondering if the morning had happened at all. I typed tacos, deleted it, typed either is fine, deleted that too, then finally settled on tacos sounds great. His reply came within seconds. "Perfect. I will pick some up on my way home." A simple conversation. Completely normal. Yet every message carried an invisible question underneath it. Were we pretending? Was I the only one pretending? By the time I left the office, Seattle had settled beneath a blanket of silver clouds. A light drizzle painted the sidewalks with tiny reflections that shimmered beneath passing traffic. I walked home instead of catching the bus, hoping the cool air would untangle my thoughts. Instead, every familiar block reminded me that home meant seeing Liam again. I did not know whether I wanted that or feared it. When I finally reached our apartment building, I paused outside the front entrance longer than necessary. My reflection in the glass looked strangely uncertain. I took one slow breath, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. The apartment smelled like fresh cilantro and grilled chicken. Soft music drifted from the kitchen. Liam stood at the counter arranging takeout containers onto 2 plates with the same easy focus he always had. He glanced up when he heard the door close. His smile appeared instantly, warm and familiar, but there was something nervous hiding behind it now, something that had not been there yesterday. "Hey," he said quietly. "You made it home." For reasons I could not explain, those 5 ordinary words felt almost as dangerous as the 7 he had spoken that morning. Dinner should have felt normal. The tacos tasted exactly the way they always did from the little place 3 blocks away. Liam complained about traffic. I told him my manager had added another pointless meeting to next week's calendar. We debated whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Every conversation sounded familiar, yet every silence carried a strange new weight. I caught him looking at me more than once, only for him to glance away the instant our eyes met. It was like watching someone stand on the edge of a diving board without ever deciding to jump. After we finished eating, I offered to wash the dishes simply because I needed something to do with my hands. Warm water rushed into the sink while Liam leaned against the kitchen counter behind me. He looked as though he wanted to say something. He opened his mouth once, closed it again, then sighed so quietly I almost missed it. "Ethan," he finally said. I turned off the faucet and looked over my shoulder. "Yeah." He hesitated. "Can we talk for a minute?" My stomach tightened. "Sure." He rubbed the back of his neck, the same nervous habit I had noticed that morning. "About what happened earlier." My heartbeat became suddenly impossible to ignore. "I thought you wanted me to forget it." He smiled faintly, but it never reached his eyes. I tried forgetting it too. The apartment grew unbelievably quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the refrigerator hummed somewhere behind us. Liam stared at the floor for several long seconds before taking one slow breath. "I lied this morning." My chest felt tight. "About being tired?" He nodded. "And about mixing up my words." I forgot every clever response I had ever rehearsed for impossible situations. They all disappeared at once. Liam looked up, and for the first time since I had known him, his confidence seemed completely gone. "I did not accidentally say those words," he whispered. "I meant them." The world seemed to narrow until only the 2 of us remained standing in that tiny kitchen. My mind searched desperately for a logical explanation, but every possibility collapsed before it fully formed. "Liam," was all I managed. He gave a tiny, nervous laugh. "See, I did it again." I blinked. "Did what?" "Confessed." His voice shook with embarrassed honesty. "Twice. In one day." I could not tell whether I was dreaming or finally awake for the first time in months. Every emotion I had carefully hidden behind jokes and routines suddenly pushed against the walls I had built around them. Before I could answer, Liam's phone began ringing across the counter. The sharp sound shattered the fragile moment between us. He glanced at the screen, and every trace of color left his face. "I am so sorry," he said quickly. "I have to take this." He answered the call with a quiet hello and listened for only a few seconds before grabbing his jacket from the chair. "My sister's car broke down outside Bellevue," he explained, already slipping one arm into the sleeve. "She is stranded, and nobody else is close enough to help." He looked at me with obvious frustration, as though leaving was the last thing he wanted. "Please do not think I am running away." I stood frozen beside the sink. "Are you coming back tonight?" "As fast as I can." He stepped toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob, then turned back one last time. His expression was steady now, almost peaceful despite the urgency around him. "Nothing I said was a mistake, Ethan." Before I could respond, the apartment door closed behind him with a soft click. I remained standing in the silent kitchen, staring at the empty doorway, wondering how one ordinary Monday had somehow become the day that changed everything without giving me the chance to say a single thing that truly mattered. The apartment felt unusually large after Liam left. It was the same 800 square feet we had shared for a year and a half, but every room suddenly echoed with the words he had left behind instead of the music he usually played while cleaning. Nothing I said was a mistake, Ethan. I walked into the living room, sat on the couch, stood up again less than 30 seconds later, then wandered back into the kitchen as though answers might still be waiting beside the sink. They were not. My phone stayed silent. The clock above the refrigerator crept past 8, then 9. I tried watching a comedy series we had been following together, but I realized 20 minutes later that I had not absorbed a single scene. My mind refused to stay in the present. It kept rebuilding old memories with entirely different meanings. I remembered the weekend we first moved into the apartment. We had spent almost 6 hours carrying furniture up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was out of service. Halfway through the last trip, I apologized for bringing too many books. Liam only laughed and said, "If we are roommates, your books are my workout." At the time, I thought he was simply being kind. Now I wondered if kindness had quietly grown into something neither of us recognized. Another memory surfaced. Last winter, I came down with a terrible cold and insisted I would be fine alone while Liam went to a friend's birthday party. He never went. Instead, he came home with soup, sports drinks, cold medicine, and enough groceries to survive a snowstorm even though there had not been a single snowflake in the forecast. When I thanked him, he shrugged and said, "What kind of roommate would I be if I left you alone?" Back then I accepted the explanation without question. Tonight, I found myself asking whether there had always been another answer hidden beneath the obvious one. At a little after 9:30 my phone buzzed. My heart jumped so quickly that I almost dropped it. The message was from Liam. "My sister is okay. Tow truck finally arrived. I should be home in about an hour." I stared at the screen for several moments before typing, "I am glad she is safe. Drive carefully." I hit send, then watched the conversation without receiving another reply. The waiting felt endless. To distract myself, I decided to straighten the apartment. Liam always teased me for organizing when I was stressed. "Some people eat ice cream," he liked to say. "You alphabetize things." He was not entirely wrong. While folding a blanket on the couch, I noticed a small spiral notebook tucked between the cushions. It looked familiar. Liam carried it in his backpack almost everywhere, usually filling it with grocery lists, reminders, and random ideas for work. I picked it up, intending to leave it on the coffee table. As I did, a folded receipt slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. I bent down to retrieve it, but my eyes caught a single handwritten sentence on the open page before I could look away. It was not a shopping list. It was not a work note. In careful blue ink, surrounded by several crossed-out versions, were the words, "Tell Ethan the truth today." Underneath that line, written again and again in slightly different ways, were practice sentences. "I think I am in love with you. I have been trying to deny this for months. I do not expect anything from you. I just cannot keep pretending." I stood completely still, the notebook resting in my hands, realizing that this morning had not been spontaneous at all. Liam had planned every word. The only thing he had never planned was finding the courage to actually say them. My first instinct was to close the notebook immediately. It felt too personal, too private, as though I had accidentally stepped into a room Liam had never meant for anyone else to enter. But the page was already open, and the neat lines of blue ink refused to let me look away. There were dates scribbled in the corners stretching back nearly 3 months. Every few pages, another version of the same confession appeared. Sometimes the words were confident. Sometimes they were crossed out so aggressively that the paper had nearly torn. One note simply read, "If he smiles, keep talking." Another said, "If he looks uncomfortable, tell him it was a joke." My chest tightened as I realized exactly what had happened that morning. Liam had not changed his mind because he suddenly stopped meaning what he said. He had panicked because he saw my shocked expression and assumed he had already lost me. Before I could sink any deeper into that thought, I heard keys turning in the front door. I quickly placed the notebook back on the coffee table, exactly where I had found it, and stepped away just as Liam walked inside. His hair was damp from the light rain, and exhaustion showed across his face, but the moment he saw me standing there waiting, he stopped moving altogether. Neither of us spoke. The apartment settled into another long silence, interrupted only by the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Liam set his keys on the counter and offered a tired smile. "She made it home safely," he said. "The mechanic thinks it was only the battery." "That is good," I answered quietly. He nodded once. then glanced toward the living room before looking back at me. I figured you probably have questions. I almost laughed at how much of an understatement that was. Instead, I took one careful step closer. I found your notebook. The color drained from his face. His shoulders dropped, as though he had been carrying something unbearably heavy all day. I was wondering where I left it, he admitted after a long pause. I did not mean for you to read it. I only saw one page. He closed his eyes for a second and let out a slow breath. That was probably enough. We stood only a few feet apart now, yet it felt like the greatest distance we had ever tried to cross. Liam slipped both hands into his jacket pockets, not to appear casual, but because they were trembling. I spent months trying to convince myself that I was confused, he said. I told myself it was because we lived together, because we got along, because you were my best friend. His voice remained calm, but every word sounded carefully earned. Then I started realizing I was looking forward to every ordinary moment with you more than anything else in my day. Making coffee, grocery shopping, watching movies we had already seen. None of it felt ordinary anymore. He smiled sadly. I kept waiting for those feelings to disappear. They never did. I searched his face, finally seeing all the quiet moments I had misunderstood reflected back at me. So this morning, he nodded before I finished. I practiced those words dozens of times. Maybe hundreds. I promised myself I would say them once and accept whatever happened next. He looked directly into my eyes. No. Hesitation left this time. Then you looked so surprised that I convinced myself I had made the biggest mistake of my life, so I tried to take it back. But pretending only made everything worse. He exhaled slowly and gave me the smallest, most honest smile I had ever seen. I cannot pretend anymore, Ethan. Even if the answer is no, I would rather live with the truth than hide behind another excuse. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear the rain against the windows again, softer now, almost like the city itself had lowered its voice to listen. Liam waited without saying another word. He was giving me the choice he had promised himself he would respect, even if it broke his heart. I looked at him and realized something that should have been obvious months ago. The man standing in front of me was terrified, not because he had told the truth, but because he genuinely believed that truth might cost him the most important person in his life. I let out a slow breath that I felt I had been holding for more than a year. Do you know what I thought after you left this morning? I asked quietly. Liam shook his head. I thought you had been joking. Then I thought maybe I imagined everything. Then I spent an entire workday trying to convince myself I should forget those words because that was what you wanted. He smiled faintly. I didn't want you to forget them. I know. I laughed softly, the sound carrying more relief than humor. The problem is that I could not. His eyes searched mine carefully, as if he was still afraid to misunderstand what came next. I took another step forward until only a small space remained between us. When you said you loved me this morning, I was not shocked because I did not want to hear it. My voice trembled despite my best effort to stay calm. I was shocked because I have imagined hearing those words so many times that when they finally became real, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Liam blinked several times, completely still. What are you saying? I smiled for what felt like the first completely honest smile in months. I am saying that I have been in love with you for a long time. His expression froze. It was almost funny watching someone who had rehearsed hundreds of confessions suddenly become incapable of forming a single sentence. Since when? He whispered. I looked toward the kitchen where our 2 coffee mugs still sat beside the sink. I do not even know anymore. Maybe it started the day you carried all my books upstairs without complaining. Maybe when you stayed home to take care of me instead of going to that birthday party. Maybe it happened so slowly that I never noticed until it was already impossible to ignore. Liam laughed quietly, and I noticed the unmistakable shine of emotion in his eyes. You really hit it well. So did you. We both laughed then, not because anything was particularly funny, but because the weight we had both carried for so long had finally begun to disappear. I kept thinking you deserved someone else, Liam admitted. Someone who made more sense. I shook my head immediately. The only thing that never made sense was pretending we were just roommates when every ordinary day with you was already my favorite part of life. Another peaceful silence settled between us, but this one felt completely different from all the others. There was no uncertainty left inside it, only understanding. Liam slowly reached out his hand, stopping halfway as though asking one final silent question. I smiled and closed the remaining distance, gently taking his hand in mine. Neither of us rushed the moment. We simply stood there smiling at each other, amazed that after months of hiding and one unforgettable day of confusion, the truth had turned out to be something neither of us had needed to face alone. The conversation did not magically erase every awkward feeling between us, but it did something far more important. It replaced uncertainty with honesty. We stayed in the kitchen talking until well past midnight, not because we were trying to solve every question about the future, but because after hiding so much for so long, even the smallest conversations felt new again. Liam admitted that he had almost canceled our lease renewal 3 months earlier because he believed moving out would be the only way to stop loving me. I laughed in disbelief, then confessed that I had secretly looked at apartment listings too, convinced that creating some distance might finally help me move on. We stared at each other for a second before laughing even harder. We almost gave up the best roommate situation in Seattle because neither of us knew how to use our words, Liam said with a shake of his head. That sounds exactly like us, I replied. The next morning arrived with golden sunlight spilling through the blinds, looking almost identical to every morning before it. For the first time, however, nothing needed to be hidden. I walked into the kitchen expecting everything to feel unfamiliar, but instead it felt surprisingly peaceful. Liam was already making coffee. He looked over his shoulder, smiled, and for a brief second both of us laughed without saying a word. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." He slid my favorite mug across the counter exactly as he always had. "Extra cream. No sugar. You still remember." He raised an eyebrow. "I always will." The simple promise settled warmly in my heart. We spent the rest of the morning doing ordinary things that somehow felt extraordinary simply because neither of us had to pretend anymore. We stopped by the neighborhood grocery store to replace everything we had nearly finished over the weekend. Liam reached automatically for the cereal I liked before asking if I wanted anything else. I reminded him that he always forgot tortillas whenever we planned taco night. He laughed and immediately added them to the cart. At the checkout line, an older cashier smiled kindly and asked, "Did you two find everything you needed?" Liam glanced at me before answering with a relaxed confidence I had never heard before. "Yes, we did. Thank you." There was nothing dramatic about the exchange, yet I noticed he was no longer carefully choosing every word to avoid revealing how he felt. That quiet confidence meant more to me than any grand declaration ever could. Back at the apartment, we unpacked groceries together, bumping shoulders as we tried to fit too many things into a refrigerator that had always been slightly too small. Every now and then one of us caught the other, smiling for no obvious reason. "What?" I finally asked. Liam closed the refrigerator door and leaned against the counter with an expression that was both amused and wonderfully calm. I spent months imagining what today might look like if everything somehow worked out. He looked around our tiny apartment with genuine appreciation. It turns out I imagined something much bigger. But honestly, I think I like this better. I followed his gaze across the familiar room filled with secondhand furniture, mismatched coffee mugs, and countless ordinary memories that no longer belonged to one person alone. Nothing about the apartment had changed overnight. The walls were the same. The furniture still leaned a little to the left. The coffee maker still made too much noise. The only thing that had truly changed was that home no longer felt like a place where two roommates happened to live. It finally felt like the place where both of us had stopped hiding. People like to believe that life changes because of extraordinary moments, but I think the biggest changes begin with ordinary mornings that suddenly feel different. A week after everything finally came into the open, I woke up before my alarm for the first time in years. The apartment was quiet except for the familiar sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen. I smiled before I even opened my bedroom door because I already knew exactly who was waiting on the other side. Liam looked up as I walked in, wearing the same comfortable sweatshirt he had probably owned since college. "Good morning," he said with an easy smile. "Good morning." He handed me my favorite mug without asking, and I accepted it with the quiet gratitude that had become part of our new routine. Nothing about the kitchen had changed, yet everything had. There were no careful conversations to avoid. No hidden feelings tucked behind harmless jokes. No wondering whether a simple act of kindness meant more than friendship. We had traded uncertainty for honesty, and somehow honesty made every ordinary day feel lighter. Later that afternoon, we met a few friends for lunch at our favorite neighborhood restaurant. As everyone settled into their seats, the usual teasing started almost immediately. You two still spending every waking hour together? One friend joked. Liam looked at me, and instead of laughing the way he always used to, he simply smiled. That is the plan, he answered. The table moved on to another conversation so naturally that I almost laughed to myself. The moment I had imagined would feel overwhelming turned out to be wonderfully simple. On the walk home, a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh rain through the streets. Liam slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and glanced toward me with the same thoughtful expression I had come to recognize. Can I tell you something? He asked. Always. He laughed softly. Do you remember the morning in the kitchen when I accidentally confessed? I raised an eyebrow. Accidentally. He grinned. All right. When I intentionally confessed and immediately panicked. I remember every second. He nodded. I practiced that speech for months, but none of my practice versions included what happened afterward. What happened afterward? He looked at me with quiet warmth. You love me back. I could not help smiling. That part surprised me too. We reached our apartment building just as the evening sun painted the windows with warm golden light. Standing outside the front entrance, Liam paused instead of opening the door. There is one more thing, he said. What is it? He took a slow breath, his eyes bright with the same nervous honesty that had changed both our lives only days before. Can I confess one more time? I laughed, already knowing the answer. Go ahead. His smile grew wider. I am in love with you, Ethan Brooks. Not just today. Not just because we share an apartment. I am in love with the person who made every ordinary day worth looking forward to, long before either of us found the courage to say it out loud. I felt my own smile grow just as wide. Then here is my answer. I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. You never have to rehearse those words again, because I am going to love hearing them for the rest of our lives. He laughed with pure relief, and together we walked through the front door into the apartment that had quietly witnessed every chapter of our story. It was still the same small home with its noisy coffee maker, slightly crooked furniture, and refrigerator that never seemed large enough. But now every morning inside those familiar walls would begin with the truth we had both spent far too long hiding, and every ordinary day ahead promised to become another memory worth coming home to.